Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. We are rolling into another week of spring practice here in Happy Valley. Just a couple more weeks of practice action on the field for the Nittany Lions until we all get back into Beaver Stadium for the April 26th blue-white game. A lot more on spring practice development coming your way at lions247.com this week. We'll be back on the field on Tuesday afternoon into Tuesday evening. We'll have a chance to hear from head coach James Franklin, multiple members of the coaching staff, and a variety of team veterans. All that coverage will be up for you at lions247.com, along with video highlights from practice, a full photo gallery on Tuesday evening into Wednesday morning. And we'll be back with the second episode, of course, of this podcast to bring you the latest from the field. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, lions247.com by then, and I encourage you to do that because 50% off the entire year of coverage at lions247.com, still available during spring ball, or $1 for 1 month. And as we have talked about every step of the way since Penn State got on the practice field in late March, this is a huge period of time for Penn State recruiting. We saw that come to fruition again over the course of this past weekend with top 100, top 200 quarterback, top 24/7 quarterback, Peyton Falzone from the state of Pennsylvania committing to Penn State. He's their second quarterback commit to the 2026 class. A really fascinating athletic figure to join this group. And they have a few developments to sort through as he joins the 2026 class. We'll do that right now with Tyler Calvaruso, a resident Penn State recruiting insider. Tyler, welcome back. Thanks for kicking off this week with us after a very eventful weekend for the Nittany Lions.
Yeah, it was definitely an eventful weekend, and it was a big weekend for Penn State. Continue to flex the in-state recruiting muscle. You welcome a pretty good quarterback and a really good kid into this 26 class as well. We spent so much time talking about on-field fit with a lot of these guys. I mean, Peyton Falzone fits pretty much everything Penn State wants to accomplish from an off-field perspective and culture building perspective as well. So I think there's plenty of reason for Penn State fans to be excited about this get, and we'll get into all the reasons why.
He is a 6'4", 6'5", 200+ pound junior at Nazareth High School in the state of Pennsylvania. Nazareth is where Jahan Dotson once starred on the high school football fields before making his way to Happy Valley, becoming an All-American Nittany Lion, a first-round NFL draft pick. Dotson was actually back on the practice field with Penn State this past week. Falzone was on the practice field on Saturday with the Nittany Lions, a few hours later announcing his commitment to Penn State. We're going to hit this from a few different angles, Tyler, because there's kind of a multi-position history to this recruitment process. Of course, he's locked in at quarterback right now, but it didn't always appear that would be the case. Let's begin, though, with the timing of this announcement, because last time we were discussing Peyton Falzone's recruitment with you here on the podcast, he had some plans for travel, for official visits coming up in the spring. We were trying to figure out whether Penn State was going to be part of that official visit itinerary. I'm certain they will be now. But all of a sudden, all the other teams that were in the mix here, the other sharks that were circling, and as I've said, I anticipated this kid could gather a lot more interest during the course of spring camps and maybe some showcase opportunities. To me, this is a huge deal, not just to get him on board with the class, Tyler. We'll talk about why when we go through his scouting report, but it's a huge deal to do it right now in mid-April before he gets back out in the camp circuit, before he gets a chance to go spend 2-day visits on different campuses and gets that real wine and dine feeling for him and his family. What do you make of the timing here? And did it surprise you at all that Peyton Falzone decided to close up shop at this stage of the calendar?
It didn't necessarily surprise me in the sense that the landing spot didn't surprise me in the end. The timing of it, 50-50, because like you touched on just now, he had plans to go take official visits and, check out other programs. He had already been to Iowa for an official leading up to his Penn State commitment over the weekend. Utah was on the docket. He had plans to get out and check out Ohio State again. He had been out there once before, was going to get out there again. And like you mentioned, man, I mean, the more visits he was going to make and, get around, and once camp season starts and Elite 11 come up in May, he goes to Elite 11 in State College and kills it there like he's capable of doing. This could be a completely different recruitment in late May going into official visits than it is right now. So I think the timing works out for all parties involved. Penn State gets a guy it wanted in its 26 class. And the fact of the matter is Falzone lands where he really wanted to land from the start. I know he spent all that time as a Virginia Tech commit leading up to late fall, early winter, where he backed off that pledge. But remember, he got back to State College during the fall while he was still locked in with the Hokies. And he gave the Nittany Lions high marks coming out of that visit. Penn State already had his attention in a really big way. Right when it offered, it caught his eye. And there was a lot of in-state appeal. He grew up around the Penn State program, watching the Nittany Lions. So, the opportunity to stay home is always a plus for Falzone, especially given the fact that he's really loved the program from the start. So I think the timing it's probably the best possible time for everyone.
Falzone, number 11 quarterback nationally in 24/7 Sports evaluation, number 177 overall in our top 24/7 for the 26 class, the number 4 player in the state of Pennsylvania. We'll talk about why that matters, because it is a rarity to see an in-state quarterback end up on scholarship as a freshman at Penn State. We'll get into those details in a moment. But in terms of Penn State being able to get to this point where Falzone's ready, they're ready, and they take this step forward together as a commitment, what was the impact of a recent phone call within the last couple of weeks between James Franklin and Peyton Falzone? Because based on Brian Doan's reporting at 24/7 Sports and at Lions 24/7, it certainly seems like it cleared the air about whether Penn State viewed him as an athlete/quarterback or a straight-up quarterback to develop all the way.
Yeah, I think the picture became pretty clear following that phone call 2 weeks ago. And Don did a great job on this, as he does everything else for us. I definitely suggest giving it a read if you haven't already. But really, the conversation was, look, you're going to be a QB for us. That's how we want you. We want you under center. We want you playing that position. Previously, the conversations, because we always harp on Falzone's athleticism, what he could do, and all the parallels between him and Tyler Warren, former Virginia Tech commits, former high school quarterback with elite athletic profiles. Could they be a tight end at the next level? Obviously, we saw that come together with Warren. With Falzone, that was a maybe, but Penn State made it crystal clear to Falzone. We want you as a QB. And you could see it was trending that way following his early spring practice visit because of who he spent time around while he was on campus. Catching up with James Franklin is great, but he wasn't spending time with Ty Howell. He was spending time with Daniel Bryan, and he was spending time with Trace McSorley. That paints a pretty clear picture of where you're desired, right? You're not spending time around the QB's coach if the plan is for you to go play a different position at the next level. You're going to be playing quarterback. Penn State left no doubt in its pitch to Falzone during that phone call. And that really turned the tide, because he knew once he had that opportunity to be a quarterback at Penn State and continue working as a quarterback, the position he has worked really, you look at what he's done this offseason on the development front, going to Ohio, crossing state lines to work with Brad Mandler on his own accord. Kid's worked his ass off. There's no doubt about it. He wants to be a successful quarterback, and now he's going to get the chance to do that at Penn State. Once that door was open, he had no issue walking right through it.
We've brought this up before, but that is a really important part of this process as well. His training with Brad Mandler, the quarterback trainer who's based in Ohio. His past pupils include Drew Aller, the current starting quarterback for Penn State, Ethan Grunkemeyer, who we have penciled in as the primary backup quarterback at Penn State as a redshirt freshman. And now you throw in this 4-star commit for the 2026 class. And with Falzone, look, I wrote the story, I think, really immediately after his Virginia Tech commit, because Tyler Warren was getting all this Heisman and All-American buzz at the same time. And wrote about how there's some parallels there where Tyler Warren was a Virginia Tech quarterback commit, ends up being an All-American tight end. You and I both saw Peyton Falzone on Penn State's practice field last summer running some routes with Andy Kotelnicki watching closely. We saw the length, and you start to let your mind wonder what a 6'5", 200-pound frame could look like if you spend a couple of years in Chuck Losey's developmental room. But I think I'm still on board with where this could be a quarterback, because I think about the way they used Bo Prabula when he wasn't the starter last year. I don't know if this guy has the straight line speed that Bo has, because he's a little bit bigger. He might be a jumbo version of Bo Prabula, though. He might be a jumbo athlete type that you could utilize in some different ways before he even cracks your lineup as a main quarterback, Tyler. We've seen the way Andy Kotelnicki uses different pieces, how he tries to keep opponents on their toes. I'm really curious how we might see the tight end involved in the backfield again this year with a guy like Luke Reynolds, particularly, who has a history playing quarterback. But when you kind of roll this thing forward, and let's face it, we don't know if Andy Kotelnicki will be here in 2026 if things go really well for this Nittany Lions offense this upcoming fall. But does Falzone, to you, have roster value beyond just the developmental quarterback when he gets here? Is he somebody that could maybe have different pathways to the field, because we know Kotelnicki wants to have some gadgets out there?
Yeah, definitely. I think his overall athleticism, what he brings to the table from a physical perspective, we've talked about a bunch of skill position guys who they could get on the field early at Penn State and in the Kotelnicki system because of their multifaceted ability and the ability to do different things in an offense. Falzone, I mean, look, Bo had his own package, right? You know, they use his athletic ability to the best of their ability as a coaching staff. Falzone's a guy where, you know, if he comes in and he gets up to speed on everything he needs to get up to speed on, he takes care of business on the field, off the field, in the weight room, getting his body right. There's no reason why a player of that athletic profile can't factor in, you know, not necessarily right away, but early, given his strength as an athlete. So there is value behind or beyond just his potential as a quarterback. Because I think really, when you look at Falzone, what has me really excited about this get for Penn State personally is there's just so much untapped potential, not just athletically, but as a passer. I mean, you throw in his junior season film from Nazareth, he had a good year. The arm strength is apparent. All of the raw tool set that Falzone has, you can see it on tape. You really can't miss it because the kid's got a big arm. He's athletic. He can make throws on the run. It's all right there for the taking if you're watching his film. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, there were still some questions mechanically and developmentally about where he would go. The work he has put in this offseason, you've seen very clear mechanical progress. You've seen the throwing motion get cleaned up. You've seen him square his shoulders and get more behind his throws, which, I mean, is saying a lot considering the arm strength the kid already has. So you've got the athleticism, you've got the overall roster value, and you've got a kid who's really just, I think, scratching the surface. He's gone to the right place to get right as a quarterback. And now I think going to college, he's going to the right place as well because this staff has experience with kids of this build. They have experience getting kids like Falzone who are big athletically, they're fast, they're strong. They have a track record of getting them right with their throwing arms. And I think he's heading up in the right direction in that regard already. And Penn State can really take him to that next level. I truly believe that.
That motion was looking a lot more fluid when you saw some recent footage from that workout in Ohio, and it started to match up more with what Grunkemeier's bringing to the table, and he has one of the most pure passing motions that I think we've seen coming out of high school in recent years. So he's starting to look more like that than a guy that you're having some questions about with the mechanics maybe last year. And by the way, last year, as he's working through those mechanics and you're not quite sure if he's going to be a power conference quarterback, he goes out and wins Eastern Pennsylvania Conference Offensive MVP, about 2,200 passing yards, 23 touchdown passes, 4 interceptions, right around 700 yards as a runner with 8 additional touchdowns on the ground. That was the second year starting for Nazareth. As I said, Jahan Dotson has a lot of clout in those hallways still at Nazareth High School, and now Peyton Falzone is the next man up. And before we get into why this is kind of a rare deal with an in-state quarterback making the jump to Penn State and why it kind of stands out at this stage of the Franklin era, I just want to go through the scouting report a little bit with you, Tyler, because you've mentioned a few of the things, the dynamics in play here with his ability to do things beyond the pocket. I think it's worth noting he's got a different kind of multi-sport background than we're used to discussing. With Tyler Warren, it was baseball and it was basketball. With this young man, it's swimming and it's track and field, a little bit different there. And he's got that swimmer's body, big, broad shoulders, slim waist. You can kind of see how that correlates. But in terms of track and field, I mean, he's a low 11 second in the 100 meter. He's a guy that has put out some recent footage, and you just see him with these long strides, making up that kind of ground in a hurry. When you put it all together, what you saw from his film as a junior, what you've seen from some of the camp footage as a passer this spring, and then you factor in what he's done in other sports avenues, what kind of a prospect do you anticipate Penn State will add in 2026?
So again, still ways to go in the developmental process, but I think that's known. He's already heading in the right direction, as I've said time and time again here so far today. But the one thing that stands out to me with Falzone, where I think maybe advanced isn't necessarily the right word, but I think it's a very clear trait you want in a college quarterback, one who is mobile and can extend plays with his legs, is he doesn't get really scared in the face of pressure. And what I mean by that is you see a lot of young quarterbacks who are as athletic as someone like Falzone, and they will rely heavily on their legs to get them out of trouble. Falzone does that when he is in trouble, but he doesn't force the issue. He doesn't put himself into situations or predicaments earlier than he has to be in, before he has to bail out of the pocket. Stands in there, goes through his progressions. He's not scared to force the ball downfield when he has to drive it into a tight window. Again, there's that arm strength playing back into the equation. So it's a trait that sometimes you got to nurture the kid to get into when he gets to the next level. Falzone already has it. He never really bails too early, which it's just that really, really stood out to me. on tape, because as he continues to improve as a passer, and as he continues to improve between the ears as well, getting used to going through his progressions at a higher level against higher level defenses, making the right reads, he already has it down pat when it comes to standing in there and going through those progressions. So I think it's just going to go hand in hand with his physical development. He's already shown that he is where he needs to be from a mental perspective. Now the physical tools are starting to follow. That's the makings of a quarterback prospect who's a top 24/7 kid, number 11 quarterback in the nation, number 4 prospect in Pennsylvania overall. Why we have him ranked where we ranked, it shows not just physically with the athletic profile, as unique as it is, that's a big part of it, but what he shows on tape between the ears as well. That just really, but when I really dove into his tape coming out of his junior year, that was the first thing that really caught my eye, because he could easily just bail out of the pocket, go break off 10, 20-yard runs as he does when he has to. But nope, he stands in there and makes throws.
So James Franklin's been around this program since 2014. This will be only the second Pennsylvania high school quarterback to join the program on scholarship under his watch. And actually, you go all the way back to 2010 when Penn State brought in Paul Jones, the only in-state quarterback from the high school level that made that transition as a scholarship player to Penn State since 2010 is Bo Pribula, part of that 2022 class with Drew Aller. We just discussed the role that he had. He was very important on the second half at the Wisconsin game last year. Does Penn State make the playoffs without him stepping up in the second half? That's certainly a question. But now he's off. He's going to be well compensated and potentially the starting quarterback in the SEC for Missouri this year. But it's a long period of time where Penn State, it's not like they've been putting out an offer a cycle. They've been very selective with who they're offering in the state of Pennsylvania. Matt Zoller's last cycle also going to be competing for the job at Missouri with Bo Pribula. He was one of those rare occurrences where Penn State was actually truly in pursuit of a Pennsylvania passer. There have been cycles where they just didn't identify an offerable talent. But this is an example where they find the guy, they identify him. They obviously have a narrative that evolves over recent months and weeks about how they view him in their future, and then they land him. And where they are now, when you look at the 2026 Pennsylvania class, we've discussed a bunch who's at the top of that list. Joey O'Brien out of LaSalle College High School near Philadelphia. That's where Abdul Carter once shined. But the number 2 player in the state of Pennsylvania, Matt Sieg, safety, committed to Penn State. The number 3 player, Kevin Brown, Harrisburg offensive tackle, committed to Penn State. The number 4 player, Peyton Falzone, committed to Penn State. The number 6 player, Messiah Minkins, running back from Harrisburg, committed to Penn State. The number 9 player out of Amani Christian in Pittsburgh, defensive back David Davis, committed to Penn State as well. So you do the math really quickly here, and 5 of the top 10 players in the state of Pennsylvania are committed to the Nittany Lions for the 2026 cycle, and only 2 other players are committed, period. So 3 uncommitted players in the top 10, 5 committed to Penn State, 1 committed to Notre Dame, 1 committed to Rutgers. And I think that leads me to your doorstep again here, Tyler. Pennsylvania recruiting for Penn State is another feather in the cap of James Franklin with Peyton Falzone. Last cycle, even going into the summer, there was some stress among Nittany Lions fans about how they were handling their backyard, as people like to call it, on the recruiting trail. How different is the scenario playing out thus far in Penn State taking care of what it wants to take care of in Pennsylvania for the 26th cycle?
Yeah, I was going to say, man, I mean, the conversation is essentially night and day. You know, it's a hell of a different spot that we're in now compared to this time last year. And really, there are 2 big differences for me. The biggest one is last cycle, there were some questions on kids who were highly ranked in Pennsylvania. You know, there were some highly ranked guys where Penn State really just wasn't that involved. I mean, that's not spin. That's just the fact of the matter looking back on it. And this year, they've really zoned in on, well, Pennsylvania, it's a really strong 26 group. There's a lot of talent scattered throughout the state. And they've been zoned in on a lot of those guys early since they were underclassmen, freshmen, sophomores. They've built up the relationships to where they need to be to continue flexing that in-state recruiting muscle. And I think it's a combination of everything Penn State has done right on the field, you know, the success, making it to the college football playoff semifinals. It gives kids more reason to stay home and say, hey, look, if I want to be successful, compete for a national title, get to the next level, do I really need to leave Pennsylvania to do that? Because look what the Nittany Lions are accomplishing on the field. That makes them an already strong option even more viable. So that's a feather in Penn State's cap on the trail. Their reputation of taking care of in-state guys from everywhere. Of course, Steph does a really good job of that, but taking care of in-state guys, make them feel like a true home away from home, no matter where they're from in the state, whether it be Western Pennsylvania, Philly, central part of the state. You go to State College, you feel right at home around the staff. Your family can come see you play quite easily. So that overall family vibe that the Penn State program creates, it helps in in-state recruiting. I think you're seeing it in this 26 cycle. And there's a very good chance that whether it be kids inside of the top 10 within the state, kids ranked just outside of the top 10 within the state, because there are some really good ones that Penn State is involved with who are not ranked inside of that top 10 in the state. This is a big-time opportunity for James Franklin and his staff in the 26 cycle. You're already seeing it in the 27 cycle as well with some of the early in-state commitments they have there. But in 26, Pennsylvania is always going to be, the foundation of Penn State's recruiting class. It's going to be the foundation of their efforts. But even more so this year, because it's just a stronger year overall. It's better than last year. And 27, as good as 26 is, 27 has the chance to be even better. So I think you're starting to see the beginning of what could be a real in-state recruiting role for Penn State. And we've seen plenty of those, but given the talent, given where the Nittany Lions stand with a lot of these kids, you could really see James Franklin and his staff hit some big-time home runs.
Franklin has acknowledged in the past that while they do love to take care of who they want in Pennsylvania, it's an annual basis. It's not always, you can't lean on Pennsylvania being a Texas or a California or a Florida for you perennially, where you're going to have 30 guys to offer probably on a cycle basis. But this seems to be a good one. Like you said, looking toward 27, that's also a very intriguing situation as well. And meanwhile, we got to acknowledge we made it this far, but we've got to close the quarterback conversation by saying he's not the first quarterback in this class, Peyton Falzone. He joins a cross-country commitment from last summer, Troy Hune, out in San Diego, California, Mission Hills High School, a 6'4", 200-plus pound quarterback in his own right. He's number 202 overall in our rankings, so about 25 spots behind Falzone in the top 24/7. He's the number 14 quarterback compared to number 11 for Peyton Falzone. This is a young man who went on record with us at 24/7 Sports about Peyton Falzone and the fact that Penn State was clearly interested in bringing him in as part of a 2-quarterback class. What do we hear from Troy Hune at that stage? And ultimately, what do you think about this being a 2-quarterback class when December's signing period arrives?
Well, when it comes to Hune, it's kind of the same mindset as Falzone. Look, we're going into a good QB room no matter what. I'm ready to compete. Ready to fight that fight. Both of those guys are entering this 26 Penn State class with pretty much the same exact mindset. Hune caught up with our guy Blair Angulo not over the weekend, but following his most recent visit to campus, and he went on record and said, look, this is the top quarterback room in the country, so I got to be ready to compete no matter who's in it. Falzone's in it now, and those two know each other a little bit as well, so I think that's a plus because there's already a little bit of a relationship there, just from crossing paths on campus in the past and whatnot, because both of those guys made it out for the playoff game against SMU in December. So there's a little bit of familiarity there, and those two are going to work on building their relationship and getting closer. But from a competition standpoint, from a how does this impact Penn State's 2026 recruiting class standpoint, it's a really easy answer. It doesn't. Hune's not going anywhere. He's locked in with Penn State. He loves to compete. So this kind of falls into his realm. So it's a good situation, I think, for all parties involved. It's also why it's a good situation for all parties involved. Penn State staff has a lot to do with it because they've been very transparent with Troy Hune about the direction that they are taking things with a potential 2-quarterback class. There's been a very open line of communication about that possibility. Sometimes elsewhere you see situations where there isn't that open line of communication, and kids and parents involved, they start to feel a certain way because the plan wasn't communicated clearly. Penn State staff has shown time and time again in these specific kinds of situations, if there's a plan, it's going to be communicated as clearly as it could possibly be. Hune and his family are on board with what's happening. And, we are where we are here with spring ball winding down, heading into official visits. You got 2 QBs on board, and I think it's the way to go. Not only from an overall numbers perspective, but you've got 2 QBs who do different things. Troy Hune's profile is different than Peyton Falzone's profile as a prospect. Hune's not the athlete that Falzone is. He's more the pocket passer type, and that's perfectly fine because Penn State has loved his skill set. That's another thing that I think needs to be made clear about Troy Hune, in the sense that, you see a second quarterback enter the class, and then you start to wonder, what's Penn State's opinion of the kid who's already in the class? Hasn't changed at all. They're still as high on him as they were when they took him last June. And they felt inside of Lash that was a huge, huge get for this 26 class. Opinion hasn't changed. Nothing's changed. So I think numbers-wise, it's good. And individual player-wise, you've got two of the best QBs you could possibly welcome into a class.
It'll be fun to follow. Drew Aller is going to hit the exit door one way or the other after this upcoming season. You've got a redshirt sophomore in Jackson Smolik, a redshirt freshman in Ethan Grunkemeyer, and then a freshman who arrived this winter in Beckham Kritza, who will try to do as much as they can to kind of set the tone going into 2026 when that quarterback job will be open. And then you got these two top 24/7 talents joining the party, joining that competition. It'll be interesting to follow. It'll be the first two quarterback class for Penn State since they brought in Drew Aller and Bo Perbula in 2022. They've had some unsuccessful classes. 2019, I think it was Michael Johnson Jr. And Taquan Roberson. Didn't really pan out for either of them at the college level long term, certainly not here at State College at least. And then you go back to Franklin's first ever recruiting class. He inherited a commitment from Michael O'Connor, IMG quarterback down in Florida, but it was the young man he flipped from Vanderbilt, who a lot of teams thought was going to be a college safety, Trace McSorley, who ends up being at the forefront of that 2016 Big Ten championship run. Now he's back in town as assistant quarterbacks coach, making an impact on guys like Peyton Falzone and Troy Hune. And last time we saw Hune here in Happy Valley, just about 12 days ago or so, he had the play call sheet on his wrist. He was locked in. He was a few yards behind Drew Aller going through drills. So certainly seems like someone who's ready to cross America and come from San Diego to State College when it's time for that to happen. When we look at this class overall now, eighth nationally, 10 commitments on board. And the question is always, well, who's next? And I posed that to you for the sake of this podcast episode. Tyler, you came up with a few names who you think could be next to follow Peyton Falzone into this class, continue to build it, maybe push it towards top 5 status nationally. Who do you want to start with in this conversation?
Might as well stay in state. We just spent a lot of time talking about how Penn State has the opportunity to clean up within state lines. And, Grayson McKee, the offensive tackle prospect from LaSalle, really, really good player. High upside, I believe. His athleticism is exactly what Phil Charlton wants out of his players at the position. He's become a big priority for the staff. Penn State offered during the fall. Did not take long for him to rise really high up the board. Makia hasn't necessarily been on campus as much as some of the other in-state guys in this 26 class, but I'll tell you what, he's made the most of his handful of trips to State College, and that took place again last week. Penn State continued to make a strong impression. I think he sees a clear fit on the offensive line, not just from an on-field perspective, but in terms of culture in Phil Trotwell's room. I think he feels he could fit into that quite nicely, and he might be back again for the blue-white game. At this point, he told me there's a possibility that he gets back again within the next couple of weeks. Spring game would be a good opportunity for that because, his teammate at LaSalle, Joey O'Brien, is slated to visit for the blue-white game as well. That's tentative, of course. Things change and it's fluid, but that seems to be the plan. And Makia could easily join him for that, or he can make it up on his own accord, depending on what happens. But he's one that's jumping out at me, probably more coming out of the week and the weekend than he was previously. We already knew he was high on Penn State's board, no doubt about it. But he's given the Nittany Lions some pretty clear high marks. And look, he's in that top realm for Trout, and he's done a good job closing on his top guys in recent cycles. He already did that with Kevin Brown during the summer. Could McKee be the next in-state tackle to commit? The conversation about next is always tough because you don't know when exactly. Sometimes you do, obviously, but sometimes these kids, they like to keep it a little bit more open-ended, go through their OVs and then make a decision. But I could see McKee making that jump at some point. And moving over to the other side of the trenches, Alex.
Can we just talk about McHugh for just? I think he follows to the T almost. Garrett Sexton a couple cycles ago. Owen Alicine the last cycle. Guys who are 6'6", 6'7" as high school juniors. And you start to say, well, what does that look like when they're 20 years old? They're not 300 pounds yet, but that's okay. They're kind of thin prospect profiles right now, and Phil Troutwine has done a great job with building those kind of guys up. I know they feel really good about the tackles and Egan Boyer and Garrett Sexton and the new guy and Owen Alasine, what they've been able to accomplish on campus thus far, and where they could be a year from now in that tackle conversation. So I think he has a type, right? And Grayson McHugh would kind of match that up. And oh, by the way, if he were to come on board with Penn State in the near future, he is high school teammates at LaSalle College with the number one player in the state of Pennsylvania, Joey O'Brien. So you've already got like a couple commitments in place in Harrisburg. If you can maybe work your way toward that status in LaSalle College, we're talking about one of the better in-state classes that James Franklin will have come up with during his time at Penn State. I'll let you move on. I know we got a guy in Philly to get to.
Oh, man, yeah, I love this kid. I've loved him since he was a freshman. Alex Haskell, St. Joe's Prep standout defensive lineman. He's one of those guys. There are a few guys every year who surprise me when they don't blow up nationally, because I see the skill set and I see the athleticism and the strength, and it's like, all right, this kid has the makings of all a national recruit. Why is he not ranked among the nation's elite just yet? Haskell's a quiet guy. He doesn't camp a whole lot. He really just locks in on his business on the field, doesn't take a whole lot of visits. And there are some whispers that he might be ready to wrap things up for a school at some point in May. Because in a perfect world, and we've talked about this, in a perfect world, Alex Haskell wraps things up and he only takes one official visit during official visit season, and that official visit goes to his school of choice. He's not, really looking for a situation where he's going to take 4 or 5 OVs during the summer and then come to a decision. He would like to get things done. And I think Penn State's in a solid spot to be the one that gets it done. Michigan is probably the stiffest competition I look at in this situation. That goes back to my conversation with Haskell during the fall, when he straight up told me, if Michigan was to make a move on me, it's something I would have to seriously consider. Michigan did indeed make that move. That sentiment remains. But look, Penn State's done an excellent job with him. Deion Barnes has done an excellent job with him. And, we've talked about playing in the past. St. Joe's Prep, not an easy place for Penn State to crack, but they finally broke through with Cam Smith in 25. And Haskell has even said, look, the past is the past, right? Just because Penn State hasn't gotten guys from our school in the past doesn't mean I'm going to write him off or not give him as much consideration as other places, because he feels good about what the Nittany Lions have going on. He feels good about Deion Barnes. He really likes James Franklin. He likes his leadership style, and he thinks Penn State is a place where he can develop. So 2 in-state guys as part of this conversation for me. Haskell, I think, could definitely wind up in this class, and McKeel, I think, could definitely wind up in this class as well. That would be 2 really high-quality gets on both sides of the trenches.
And Haskell has always struck me, since we got to look at him before his sophomore year in prospect camp, as somebody who could fill a variety of roles in the defensive front for you, because he's a pretty thin-built guy right now. There's not a lot of flab on his body. We know that it doesn't take long for Penn State to put 30 pounds on a freshman defensive lineman if they want to. So really intrigued by Haskell. And you're right, he just seems like a worker. Kind of a tunnel vision young man, but I think it would be a really impressive pickup, despite his lack of really kind of fireworks stature in the rankings at this moment at 24/7. The one other name we wanted to get to, another defensive player, one down in Virginia at Patriot High School in Nokesville, Matthew Canoe.
Yeah, I have been close on a crystal ball pick for him for a little bit now. I think based on some conversations I had during the weekend about where things stand with him, I'm probably going to go with that at some point here soon. Michigan is in here. They're involved, and they're a factor. He's going to be out in Ann Arbor this weekend, and I do think Michigan has the chance to make a strong impression, but not all signs, but most of the signs continue to point towards Penn State being that top school for Canoe right now. He's been very candid about where the Nittany Lions stand in his process. Going back to the fall, he straight up called him his leader, and they have remained high on his list. So factor in that. You factor in the relationship that is formed with Canoe and Dan Connor, and also Jim Knowles. Jim Knowles has played a part in this one. I know people have conversations about how involved he is in recruiting, but he's one of those targets in the 26 class where there's been a healthy amount of contact. And Canoe has learned plenty about his potential fit in Knowles' system. He already had a good idea of how he would factor into the linebacker room, especially with Connor running the show, because Connor was involved in his recruitment from the start, going back to the fall. But his recent trip to Penn State for spring ball gave him a good visual of how things would go for him in Penn State's defense. It's actually kind of ironic, because if you go back to Peyton Falzone, he told Doan that you get out to spring ball and you see it, and it starts to get more real. You start to really see how you fit and how things will go for you potentially in the future. I think Canu falls into that same conversation. He got to spring practice, saw the defense for himself, and said, hey, look at the way these linebackers are flying around. Look at the way they line up. Look at the way they're moving overall. That plays to my strengths. That's something I could fit in. That's a system where I could be successful. So I think Penn State has pushed a lot of the right buttons with him.
And at 6'3", 220 plus pounds, one of the more physically developed members of this 2026 linebacker class within the region here, as Penn State tries to tighten up that target board, add some talent. Let's talk about some of those visits that recently took place. A bunch of recruits on campus this past Saturday for spring ball sessions. We saw several when we were on the field last week, midweek. A few names that we wanted to get to, and we can start with one who's committed. But we're going to pair him up with another. Leighton Von Brandt has been committed to Penn State since November. It was a huge foundational piece to add for the 27 class. He's out of Middletown, Delaware, and number 37 overall nationally, number 4 offensive tackle nationally, a guy that we absolutely loved. With a few looks at him in the camp setting last summer, it certainly was sounding like he was very high on Penn State going into his sophomore season. By the end of it, he's committed to the Nittany Lions. He was a Max Preps All-American nationally among sophomores. But so is Max Hiller. I believe he was also a Max Prep freshman All-American a year earlier at Coatesville Area High School in the state of Pennsylvania. He's number 3 nationally among offensive tackles, just one slot ahead of Leighton Von Brandt. He's the number 1 overall prospect in the state of Pennsylvania for the 2027 cycle. And I mentioned Von Brandt being the number 37 overall player across the country among high school sophomores. Well, Hiller is the number 16 overall player. And just like Von Brandt did, perhaps even more so, he sent us home with a lot to think about where his career is going to lead. He looked like a future first-round talent, quite frankly, when we got a look at him last year, playing a variety of positions halfway through his high school career on the camp scene. So Von Brandt is selling this program as much as any Penn State commit in any class right now. He's very vocal. He's trying to get guys to campus with him. He's made that very obvious. And he was not shy about getting that chance to spend Saturday's practice right there alongside Maxwell Hiller. And if you can kind of close your eyes and picture these guys sharing an offensive line in 2028, 2029, these are, upper echelon pieces when you talk about stacking elite talent in the offensive line room. Phil Troutwine, if you can get both these guys on board in 27 class, I'm not sure there'll be a better tackle tandem nationally for anyone. And I know that's saying a lot right now because they're still pretty young, but they're at that level.
Here's what you need to know about Von Brandt as a peer recruiter, if any Penn State fans were wondering. And I actually caught up with him this morning to discuss that more in depth, and I'll have more on that. I think it's going to be a really great read. But this is what you need to know about the way Von Brandt has been moving publicly and behind the scenes. This visit over the weekend, it wasn't just him and Max Hiller kind of just, popping up on campus at the same time. Like, oh, hey, what's up? No, they actually coordinated the fact that they were going to be on campus the same weekend. That was something they actually discussed. So that tells you about the work Von Brandt is putting in. He's literally working on kids' visit schedules at this point to make sure that he's around so they can talk while on campus. That speaks volumes. He's done a great job, I think, of promoting the Penn State brand as much as a commit could possibly, sell it publicly, behind the scenes, text message, FaceTime, all that stuff. He's been an active participant in all of it. And Hiller, they have a really good relationship. Even without Von Brandt, though, Hiller, he really, really likes Penn State. I'm going to be catching up a little bit more with him later. And it was I got to go back and look at the numbers. It was either his 8th or 9th. I believe it was his 9th trip to campus on Saturday. And he's yet to play a snap as a junior in high school. So we always see it really on a cycle basis. There are a few kids who have those kinds of visit numbers. And more often than not, there are, of course, some outliers. More often than not, those kids wind up suiting up for the Nittany Lions at the next level. When you spend that much time around campus, when you emphasize getting back to campus and being around the staff that often and learning about what the program has to offer you, it tends to go well for Penn State. Again, there's some situations where it doesn't, but more often than not, it usually works out. I think Hiller could be one of those guys. Now, he's going to go through his process. He's not in a rush. He's a national recruit. He's got, almost every blue blood high-level offer you could think of off the top of your head. He's going to get out and take visits. But there's a very clear draw to Penn State for Max Hiller, and I don't think that's going away. I think it's actually going to be pretty tough for it to go away when Le'Veon Brand's in his ear every second about teaming up with him at the next level. So Penn State's in a good spot there early. If I was the type to throw around early crystal ball picks, I might do it for Hiller. I think the Nittany Lions have fared that well. But crystal ball pick or not, your main takeaway should be if you're a Penn State fan, Nittany Lions have a real chance to win that one when that time comes.
Yeah, we'll see when that time comes. You keep getting them through that revolving door into the Penn State facilities that you like how things are starting to stack up there. Von Brandt, in terms of that 2027 class for Penn State, he is one of 3 commits, along with Khalil Taylor, a Pittsburgh wide receiver who's highly rated, also a top 100 prospect. And then Kamon Spell, also out of Western PA. He is a top 100 recruit. So really a strong start there within the region, within the state for Penn State. 2 names to get to in the 2026 class who've also gotten to campus of late. We'll begin with Malvern Prep standout Jackson Ford. He's a guy that we have labeled as an athlete at 24/7 Sports. Penn State sees him as an edge rusher, right around 6'4", 240 pounds right now, just inside the top 200 rankings at 24/7 Sports, number 199. He is the number 5 player in the state of Pennsylvania. We were talking about Tyler, Penn State stacking up those in-state commitments from the highly rated players across this state. Is this another dude that we need to be watching closely in the months ahead?
Yeah, definitely. He's already got the official visit, the June official visit locked in. He's going to be going elsewhere for visits. He right now it seems like he's going to take his full OV slate, and it's a loaded one. But Penn State, each time he gets forward to campus, it seems like he just learned something new that really opens his eyes to things in Happy Valley about what he could accomplish there and how he would fit on and off the field at Penn State. It seems like each visit is an educational experience of sorts for him. And, going back to early in his recruitment when Penn State first offered during the summer, he was a kid who clearly popped in terms of traits and ability. And as time has gone on in his prospect profile, he's a top 24/7 kid now. He's a known commodity now. He looks better and better as a fit on that edge position for Deion Barnes. And that's been communicated to him quite clearly. Penn State loves him. They love the upside, and they're pushing to land him. I think they'll have a chance. Nothing's done. He's still pretty open to the schools he has OVs locked in with. Penn State's one of those schools, so they're getting all the consideration they could possibly get from yet another high-level in-state prospect.
And we'll finish with another defensive player on the target board for Penn State, someone that you'll find down at Maryland Powerhouse, DeMatha Catholic, and that's big safety Darrell Carey in the 2026 cycle, considered a top 25 prospect at his position, right around 20 offers, several within the Big Ten, and Penn State sent him home with a lot to consider.
Lot to consider, and a lot of that push comes from the fact that Carey's right up there on that safety board. We talk about Joey O'Brien being the guy at the position in 26, and no doubt about it, he is uberly talented kid. Carey's right up in there in that conversation as well. Anthony Poindexter loves Darrell Carey. Bigger safety. Again, guys, me and you have discussed that build. Dex does a good job of developing them, and there's a track record there. There's a track record of success. I think Carey's actually a little bit underrated in the region. I know that might be saying a lot for a kid who's already a high 3-star prospect on our end. I think he has clear 4-star ability. I saw him during the fall a little bit when I went out to see LeVar Keys, and DeMatha really controlled things against Roman Catholic down in Philly, but Carey was a guy who clearly stood out. His presence on the back end of the secondary, it was evident that he was a really intriguing talent. Just from the physical build, just the way he lurked back there as a safety, you can see, well, this kid. Some kids just pop and they pass the eye test. He was one of them. And as time has gone on, he's thrived on the camp circuit in the past. Under Armour Baltimore was a place where he really succeeded and garnered attention, well-deserved attention at that. He's a top name for Penn State on the safety board, as I said, and I think coming out of a weekend, they did a really good job with him during this visit, just delivering the message of, hey, look, we want you here. We're not going to pressure you into it. The staff is really good at doing. They're good at making that clear that you're going to go when the time is right for you, but we really want you here, and we're going to continue to want you here at a high level. So he's got an official locked in, and things are going well.
Last time Penn State plucked a big safety prospect out of DeMatha Catholic, it was KJ Winston, and that worked out pretty well for all parties involved. Tyler, I've mentioned it a bunch of times the last few weeks, and as we're getting down to the final stretch of spring ball here, we're at the start of our second to last week. Next week will be the last week of practice action, culminating in the blue-white game. I keep talking about, the coverage we got from coming off the practice field, the notebooks, the photo galleries, the video highlights. But along the way, you're popping in a bunch of recruiting updates. I know we've got 3 more opportunities for visits to take place this week with these practices. Just give us your spiel real quick before we say goodbye to the folks out there, what they can gain from a recruiting angle by taking advantage of either 50% off for a VIP experience for an entire year or $1 for 1 month that gets you through mid-May at this point.
Look, we prioritize catching up with these kids, getting their thoughts out of the visit, but it's not just visit reaction that we bring to the table. It's bigger picture stuff. It's where kids stand on the board. It's the way the boards are shaping up. It's who's going to be on campus and when they're going to be on campus before they get to campus. It's how do things look at certain positions heading into official visits. Again, it's not just the individual stuff. It's the bigger picture stuff that leads into this class coming together. This is the time. If you're going to jump on board, this is really the time, because we're at a juncture where we're approaching the biggest recruiting event of the spring with the blue-white game. That's going to be a monster day for Penn State. There's going to be a lot of intel and reaction coming out of that. And then guess what? Less than a month later, we're right into official visits. We're jumping right into it with a big first weekend, May 16th through 18th. That's Penn State's first big official visit weekend of official visit season. It's a star-studded list.
And Tyler, you know how we plan on finishing out that big weekend too? We plan on seeing both Penn State quarterback commits throwing the ball around at an Elite 11 camp here in State College, where we'll have our entire coverage team there. And so camp season's underway by mid-May. We got several camps here on campus that Penn State coaches will be running in June. And so I know we all get excited about this Penn State team maybe chasing a national championship this year. We've got you covered with the team insight. You're going to have that throughout the time, but don't overlook what you can gain as this 2026 class really starts to take shape in the next few weeks, the next few months. Tyler Calvaruso, Brian Doan, our coverage team, they have you locked in every step of the way. You will not be surprised by much if you're following our coverage over at Lions247.com. And whether you're doing it for $1 for a month or 50% off for the entire year, you're not going to find a better deal than the one we're offering during spring ball. So sorry to jump on you with the one more throw of the promo there, but I think you do a lot of work behind the scenes that maybe isn't obvious to everybody if they aren't following our VIP coverage. So I wanted to make sure we got you to stand on your soapbox a little bit and explain what you're going to do. Yeah. All right, brother. Well, we'll talk to you soon. Always a good time with you on the podcast. We had a lot to talk about. We'll see what we have to discuss next time around. I encourage everyone to check out our coverage of Peyton Falzone's commitment to Penn State. We've got it covered from a few different angles, a scouting report, kind of a recruitment story, and how he ultimately landed at quarterback here in the eyes of the Penn State staff, all over at the website. Tyler, enjoy the rest of your day. We'll talk to you real soon.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
As promised, we are getting back on the practice field Tuesday afternoon into Tuesday evening. Head over to Lions247.com for the latest, and we'll get back to you with the second episode of this podcast later in the week to break down our sights and sounds from Penn State practice and anything else that may pop up that we want to address. You'll hear that right here on the podcast. For now, stepping aside, I'm Tyler Donahue. Thanks as always for listening or watching. We'll catch you next time right here on the Lions 24/7 podcast.